There are some principles of visual communication that you'll want to pay attention to as you design your websites. The first one is symbolism. So most companies have symbols, and you may want to either find, or if you have someone artistically inclined in your group, create a symbol to use on your home page or perhaps throughout your website. The symbols visually represent the mission of the company. So for Goodwill, the G is a smiley face, which goes along with their mission to provide services, products at a reasonable price, to recycle and to provide jobs for people with disabilities. FedEx has this sort of hidden arrow here in the negative space between the E and the X, which of course relates to their mission of delivering products. And Gotham Books is a publishing company, so they have created a skyscraper here out of books. You have to be careful with symbols and not choose something that will give off the wrong tone or be misinterpreted by people of a different culture. For example, the Red Cross has traditionally used a cross as their symbol, even though they are not a Christian organization. And so in Muslim countries, they changed and began using the Red Crescent because they wanted people to feel comfortable and to feel welcome if they needed medical aid or supplies. And the Red Cross has also adopted a sort of neutral symbol called this red diamond that is sometimes used. So you do have to be careful when choosing visuals that you're not offending international readers or anyone unintentionally. Here's a more local example. So Century Insurance in Stevens Point for a long time had this logo, and in the last year they switched to this one. They did hire a marketing company named Future Brand to create their new logo, and Future Brand's explanation was this. The old logo took the company name to heart, depicting a sentry standing guard. As a drawing, it was actually nice, but as a logo, I don't think anyone wants an armed white man in theirs. And later on, they say the new icon is a yin-yang made out of single opening quote marks that reveal an S in the counter space. It's a nice, simple gesture of an icon and is very well balanced and locked up with the word mark. It manages to convey communication and collaboration without being too literal about and without the threat of a musket. So they really sort of felt like that symbol had had its day and they needed something new. So again, you might borrow a symbol that's already out there on the web, or you might create a symbol to use on your website. Another thing you should think about is consistency. So this slide has a lot of inconsistencies. There are inconsistencies in font type, there are inconsistencies in color, there are inconsistencies in the way the links are created, there are inconsistencies in the margins. And the overall effect is ugly, busy, and unclear. So you want all of those things to be consistent. Font sizes are also inconsistent. And this is really the best way to do links instead of putting the URL up there. When you hover over it, you get the URL anyway, and this just looks a lot nicer. And that goes not only for websites, but for emails or anything. So consistency means having everything the same. Of course, contrast is important, so you want to choose colors that make it easy for readers to see. This, of course, is an example of very poor contrast. So, black and white, light and dark colors are the best. You want to think about balance, too. So this is a very symmetrical, formal balance. It reminds you of ceremonies, a mantle, everything is evenly spaced. This is also considered balance. We call this an informal balance. So the shelf isn't tipping over. Things are not symmetrical. It's more dynamic, but it's still balanced. Imbalanced would be if you had all of the items pushed to one side of the shelf. Then that would just look odd. There would be all this sort of empty white space. So you may think about your topic and about your audience and whether a more formal balance would fit with that or an informal balance would fit with that. Emphasis is also important. So you have to make sure when you're designing something visually that the biggest, darkest, boldest, most unique looking item is the thing that you want to draw people's eye to, because that's what their eye will be drawn to. So on this magazine cover, the word tech is what is most important. That's what your eye is drawn to first because it's bigger and it's bold. In this little drawing here, your eye is drawn to the mouth first because it's different from what we normally expect on a smiley face. And in this program, your eye is really drawn to the treble clef first because it's in color and it's three-dimensional. So again, you have to make sure when you look at each page on your website that whatever your eye is drawn to is the thing that you intend it to be drawn to. So you don't want something in a really large font or really different from everything else unless that's what you want to emphasize. Convention is also important. So there are conventional web designs. For example, here's a conventional website for a college. It looks very similar to Midstate's, where you have the navigation bar across the top. Even the words on the navigation bar are the same: about us, academics, admissions, cost, aid, student life. So this is what people expect when they're looking at a college website. This one at Bucknell is very different, and people were very surprised when they saw this college website. You can't even really tell that it's a college website. The navigation bar at the top only has two things: Start Exploring and the Everything directory. There's an infinity symbol here that's a link. People really liked this design because it was so unconventional, so it drew a lot of interest, but there was some peer-reviewed research done on the website, and groups of students and teachers said that they couldn't find their answers to their big questions. Does this college have my program, and how much does it cost to go there? So they've recently redesigned the website, so it still looks slightly unconventional, but you can find the answers to those questions. So convention is a double-edged sword. People expect you to follow conventions. If you break it, it can be good because you're going to stand out, but it can be bad because you're not delivering what people expect and they might be confused. Simplicity is another of the principles of design. So this is a not very simple chart. We call this chart junk. The picture is offensive, and also just having so much going on in the background muddies the meaning. So really this should just be a simple line graph. Now this also is a double-edged sword. There was some peer-reviewed research done on chart junk and busyness, and they did find that people who viewed charts, simple charts and busy charts, did the same on immediate tests, and then when tested 3 weeks later, people who viewed the busy charts actually retained the information, probably because the charts were so odd that they were able to remember them. But the general rule is that you want things to be simple and clear, simple and beautiful, so you don't want your web page to be too cluttered and too confusing. Ethics. You will be using photos for this website. For the purposes of our class, you can use any photo on the web without citing it. Don't use anything that has a watermark because it's going to look bad. The reason for that is because it's just going to take us too long to find photos in Creative Commons that we want. I've done it that way before, and it just kind of gets in the way of getting this website done quickly. We're not publishing this to the web in a way that other people will be able to find it. You'll only be coming up with the URL that I will find, so it won't be a problem for us. If you were developing your own website and worked for a business, you would have a budget, so you would be able to pay for photographs and pictures. So we don't need to worry about copyright for photos, but I did want to talk about another kind of ethics. So here is a picture that was originally taken, but here's the picture that was printed in the newspaper. So you may ask yourself for a moment whether you think that's ethical. And here's another example. This picture was taken, and this picture was taken, but a composite was created by the photographer and sent to the newspaper for publication. So you may again want to pause the video and just stare at that picture for a moment. Both of these are unethical, so both photographers were fired. This sports photographer was found to have doctored thousands of photos over the years. So you can't just Photoshop in a basketball to make your shot more exciting. A picture is supposed to be a photograph is supposed to be a representation of reality, so people expect it to be that. This one, is also unethical, and this photographer was fired. And here the consequences are much more serious because the story that the photo is telling is really changed. The soldier's stance and who he seems to be speaking to in this picture is different than in this one and in this one. And again, because it's so much more serious than just a basketball game, this is clearly unethical, although both are unethical and both photographers were fired. and they'll never be hired again. So how this might play out for you in your websites is that, you need to make sure that when you're selecting pictures that you're not using a picture that tells a different story than what you're using it for. So you need to make sure that you're not representing photos unethically that way. You should pay attention to color. So this is George R.R. Martin's original website. He's the author of Game of Thrones. This light purple is not a good color for his books in particular, if you've ever watched them or watched the movie. His website, now that he's famous, actually looks like this. So that is a little bit more representative with the gray and the kind of stone background of the subject of his books and the seriousness and, kind of violence and the nature of the TV. So you should pay attention to color symbolism. And you can, I think there is a chart in your book, but you can also just look online at what the colors symbolize and think about your subject that you're writing about and what background colors and font colors might be appropriate for your particular subject and purpose. Typefaces. This slide looks awful because of the different typefaces that were used and also on the products, the different type colors, the fonts. It's very busy, very messy, cluttered, hard to read. So you want to limit the number to 1 or 2 typefaces per page. And of course you want to be consistent across the website. So that's where the collaboration part comes in. Use boldface with thin typefaces so that they're easier to read. Avoid italics in all caps, which can be hard to read and convey the wrong tone. Use white space between lines of text for clarity, and be consistent with your typefaces, styles, colors, and sizes. So you will have to have someone look over the whole website when each individual page is done and make sure its typefaces are consistent. So some things you might want to think about. Think about your audience, the opposing side, and think about your topic. Are there any symbols that you should or shouldn't use? Would a formal or informal balance be more appropriate for your audience and your topic? Would they prefer a conventional website design or something unconventional? And what colors might appeal to your audience and also be appropriate for your subject? So to sum up, you will be creating a website with a group. You'll be responsible for an individual page on that website. I will assign the groups. But the group will have to work together to answer these questions and come up with the home page and the thesis and make sure the whole website overall hangs together and is consistent.